ability to buy a house is easier on a Bitcoin standard. The ability to buy a new car is easier on a Bitcoin standard. The ability to start a family is easier on a Bitcoin standard. Bitcoin is the digital asset that allows Gen Z the window of opportunity to own all the analog assets that the previous generation had easier access to. Gen Zers, they are just not paying attention. They're not locked in. They're not focused in on Bitcoin because they just feel like they have no hope. I really want to try to capture the Gen Z audience and tell them actually there is a way out. People can have their money stopped. Bitcoin is unstoppable money. My tagline for my YouTube channel is literally stack sats or die trying. Most people's mission anyway is to get money, get rich, get whatever. Okay, that's fine, but we need to be making sure we're getting real money. You know what I mean? Not fake money, not fiat. This game of musical chairs is coming to an end, and when it does, you do not want to be the only one left standing, right? Bitcoin is the chair that you can sit on, not only to win the game, but to exit the game completely. Gen Zers need to focus on getting Bitcoin now. Don't be the person who has to work for Bitcoins at 50 years old because you...
Welcome back to the show, guys. Today, I'm joined by a man whose social media usernames are the target audience of who I'm trying to help. So if we get straight into it, thanks for jumping on to start with. But if you'd like to start us off with why Gen Z BTC and what the biggest problem Gen Z are facing today.
Yes, sir. Finn, thank you for having me. And, what's up, guys? It's Gen Z BTC, aka Satoshi Guapamoto, right? Because Bitcoiners have a lot of guap. We have a lot of bread. We have a lot of purchasing power, right? Because we have the money of the future. So I'm Gen Z BTC because I'm a Gen Zer, right? I was born in 99, 26 years old. And I just one day realized that Bitcoin was so important that I had to tell other people about it, right? Whether I knew them or not, whether I personally cared about them or not, it was important to at least put the message out there, right? So I've been making content for about a year and a half. I haven't looked back, and I'll be making content until, I'm no longer breathing, right? I'll be doing this for life. It's just been really rewarding. It's been really fun. It's been really cool. But if I'm being honest, a lot of Gen Zers are not paying attention, right? The average age, I would say, for most Bitcoiners is probably between the age of 35 and 45. If we were to average it all out, right? Where are the majority of people? It seems to be like these millennial and a little bit of Gen X that is catching on to this wave. But with Gen Zers, they are just not paying attention. They're not locked in. They're not focused in on Bitcoin because they just feel like they have no hope, right? So Bitcoin is just magic internet money. It doesn't solve any of my problems. I'm just going to go ahead and keep spending and try to travel where I can. I'm never going to be able to own a house or own a home or own anything. So who really cares, right? I'm going to be a doomer and I'm going to be a doom spender and all this different stuff. And I really want to try to capture the Gen Z audience and tell them actually there is a way out of this. There is a light at the end of the tunnel. There is a key to success. And Satoshi gave it to us all the way back in 2008.
Yeah, man, I have exactly the same issues as you, that the Gen Z, our generation, aren't waking up to this opportunity that's right in front of them. And for me, the biggest thing I run into is people think that it's only about number go up and getting rich, and then they almost disregard it because it seems too good to be true. I try and hit on much more than just number go up technology, although that's an amazing aspect of Bitcoin. If we can strip it back, you say that they're kind of lost, they've got no hope. What kind of things might Gen Z be going through for people to realize this Bitcoin might be for me?
It's everyone's situation is obviously a little bit different, but I think that when we start talking about how, Bitcoin is freedom money, right? That's how we can relate it to a lot more people, right? When we start talking about, well, if you're worried about women getting their rights taken away or not being able to have credit cards and bank accounts or whatever, like maybe back in the day, if you don't like that idea, you can negate that idea completely on a Bitcoin standard, right? Because Bitcoin's money that's permissionless and that you can transact without any middlemen, right? If you're worried about living in a tyrannical regime, right? Where you think that maybe your leader is a fascist or a dictator, right? If you think that you're actually going to be put in a situation where you can't have access to your bank account because you have the wrong political opinions, then Bitcoin's really important to you because you might have never been debanked yet, but it's something that can happen to you when your money is controlled, right? There's all these different examples where if you feel like you are either currently a marginalized group or will become a marginalized group, you're going to need Bitcoin, right? Because even the people who are like the masters of the universe, who are these high up one percenters, right? Even those guys sometimes get put in a situation where you're not able to transact, right? So, like, I guess the famous example at this point is the Trumps, right? You know, when they were going through whatever they were going through, a lot of banks were not willing to offer them services, right? You know, they were not able to withdraw, deposit, access some of their savings accounts or bank accounts or offshore accounts. And if it can happen to rich people like that, it happens to rich people often, whether you're like a Russian oligarch who's had your assets seized by the US government because Russia's at war with Ukraine, or whether it's some other, even a country, right? A country having their treasuries literally frozen and taken away, which is like being robbed essentially because the United Nations or the IMF or the whatever doesn't like what you're doing on an international world stage. If you don't like any of that, then you're going to need to be a Bitcoiner, right? Because at all levels, people can have their money stopped. Bitcoin is unstoppable money. Right. So that's one way of looking at it. There's the lens of freedom that it gives you, right? You know, Bitcoin gives you the freedom to work the job that you want to work. It gives you the freedom to start a family, the freedom to own the things that you want to own, right? Because of its store of value property. So dollars today are cooked. Dollars today are cooked because you can literally make so many of them so easily, so quickly. You're debasing the currency. You're making them less rare, less valuable. They have less purchasing power. So it's harder to buy things like a house. It's harder to buy things like a car. It's harder to start a family and actually be able to confidently secure their future, right? You know, it's harder to go to school and get an education if you want to do that, right? And on top of that, the value of the education's going down. We can talk about that later. But there's all these different ways to look at Bitcoin. There's so many lenses to look at Bitcoin. And some people might find that confusing, but you should really find it exciting, right? There's so many different opportunities Bitcoin gives you. You just need to be curious enough, intellectually curious enough, and open-minded enough to actually do a little research and then figure it out for yourself, right? Don't just take my word for it, some random guy on the internet, but this is your start. This is me planting a seed for you. The rest is up to you.
Yeah, use that seed to go and ask more questions. That's what I always say, is for people to ask questions and be open to change and new ideas. Because I think so many are now shut off because of that lack of hope and because they think everything that they know up to this point is true, when clearly if everything they knew was true, their life wouldn't look how it does. So open mindedness and willingness to learn is huge. If we bring it back to you, I always like to start here, but was there a moment for you where something about money or the world just didn't add up?
Yeah, and it wasn't like I realized money was broken and then I started studying Bitcoin. It was in the middle of studying Bitcoin that I realized that money was broken, right? So, I got into Bitcoin around 2018, 2019, and then I really studied Bitcoin after the Voyager collapse, after my exchange basically took all of my money, and then never gave all of it back, right? I didn't understand what self-custody was and all this different stuff. And I believe it was during the bear market. It might have been towards the beginning of 2022, where I started to really deep dive into Bitcoin, try to understand what this thing was, why didn't it die? You know, it went down a lot, but it's still around, still doing its thing. And I watched a lot of different YouTube channels. I watched a lot of different podcasts. I read frequently asked questions. I read books, all this different stuff. And that's when I started to realize that money itself was broken, that Bitcoin was the fix to money. And fixing money literally fixes the entire world. So that was a really, really big revelation for me. And there was a lot of great content on the way that helped me to realize this. So there's a YouTube channel by a creator called Yoni Appleberg, Ioni, and he does these animations and talks about Bitcoin and about Bitcoin mining. And that was the video that really clicked for me and helped me to understand this. So shout out to Yoni. And then on top of that, I listened to the audiobook of like Broken Money, right? And I read, The Price of Tomorrow and the Bitcoin Standard. And I listened to a bunch of Michael Saylor YouTube videos, the Saylor series. And all these different things were happening. And I started to understand about rhinestones and the use of seashells as money and how money's transformed, what the properties of money are. And it was just a great educational rabbit hole. I learned way more from that than I did from going to university for 4 years. So university was just it was like a brainwashing facility, right? They try to tell you what to think and not how to think. Bitcoin was more so turning me into a person who was more skeptical and a person who wanted to verify and not just trust absolutely everything that I heard. And it was a great journey, right? The journey's still going. So shout out to Bitcoin and all the great creators and authors who are surrounding the Bitcoin network.
Awesome, man. And you just touched on there that you learned more from Bitcoin than you did in 4 years at university. What are your thoughts on university, where that leads our generation to today? And fundamentally, like you said, the brainwashing or the programming that it ultimately just leads towards being an employee.
Yeah, let's take it all the way to the beginning, right? At first you start out kindergarten, maybe kindergarten's fine, but you never know, right? Because the whole issue is that there was a time where you had one person working and then the other person was staying at home. All right. And the reason why that was so good was because you got to actually spend time with your kids. They were able to see your face more consistently. That's really important for babies and for children, right? You're able to play with children more, which again, really important for their development. And you are the ones actually raising your kids. Now, with two people being forced to work in order to barely make ends meet, one, the government gets two sources of income because now both of you are paying taxes, so they're happy. Two, your time is divided between your job and your children even more because there's not one consistent that they're seeing at home. They're not learning from one person consistently. And three, now someone else is raising your kids because you can't do it because you both have to go to work at the same time. Four, it's even worse because the price of childcare is increasing faster than your wage is, right? So it's becoming harder and harder to be able to afford a nanny or a house sitter or like a decent person to watch or look after your kids. And even if they are a decent person, people don't want other people raising their kids. That's not ideal, right? That's not the reason you had your kids. So all these issues culminate and then they get compounded and made worse by the fact that your kids are in kindergarten or they're in elementary school and they're being raised by, these people who are not credentialed typically, right? They're just kind of grab them off the street because no one really wants to be teachers because the teacher salary is also horrible and it's not keeping up with inflation. And there's that issue. So you're not getting the most high quality candidates as the teachers. Secondly, the teachers have their own agendas, right? Maybe they have a blue-haired lib agenda. Maybe they have an insane conservative agenda, whatever it is, right? They're going to push that onto your kids. So now they're raising your kids. They're telling them what's right from wrong. They're using their authority as a teacher to basically say how the kids should be growing up and oh your parents are doing that, oh that's bad, your parents are evil, they should be doing this, and it just turns into this confusing song and dance where your kids are being raised by other people in person, they're barely being raised by you, and they're really being raised by their friends, the internet, right, and whatever is on their algorithm. So it's just all these driving forces that are turning people insane, and it gets even more so as you go along, the educational spectrum, right? Maybe in the first few years it's not as serious because I mean they're babies, they're not really going to be having too many agendas pushed on them, but the amount of agendas that are pushed increase definitely as we get into, the adolescent years and then really really go into hyperdrive at universities, right? Universities really were meant to be like this school of free thought and marketplace of ideas and all this different stuff. And now, if you have the wrong ideas at a university, you can get kicked out, right? You might get arrested. They try to silence you however they want to silence you because you're saying the wrong things. You're the enemy, you're evil. So, university was literally, again, a little brainwashing camp for normies or for sheeple. There's a few decent classes, a few decent professors, a few decent whatever, but for the most part, it was just a lot of rote memorization and nonsense, and professors trying to push their thesis onto you, their failed thesis onto you. So, I just found that interesting. And on top of that, the price of the education is going up, the value of the education is going down because of fiat, right? Fiat ruins everything. And also, don't even call your schools public schools, right? These are government issued schools. These are government institutions, right? So your government training facility, right, as if you're a high schooler or a middle schooler or whatever, is just getting you ready for work. So there's an entire story of how the Rockefellers were trying to revamp the school system to create a generation of workers, right? People need to be ready to show up at a certain time. They need to ask permission to go to the bathroom, right? They need to be ready to sit in place for a certain amount of time and follow their marching orders and then get ready to leave when you are dismissed by your manager, right? So it's just this entire thing. It really does go deep. You just have to be able to look. The evidence is all there, and that's what we're basically creating, unfortunately, right? We're creating a system of these ADHD-ridden kids who are being raised by everyone except their parents, and it's all a symptom of broken money. And we can do that to almost every single facet of society. That's why I say when you fix the money, you literally fix the world. That's just one example of how we're able to fix the world with clean money, right? Because now you're able to get your time back. You're able to increase the value of the education, right? Because one, Bitcoiners know how to do real research. I mean? We actually care about the truth, not what's convenient or whatever the status quo is. And there's all these different trickle down runoff benefits of Bitcoin, and for Bitcoiners being the ones who are in charge of different sectors. So that was a super long rant, but sometimes these things take long rants, they take deep dives, and that's not even the whole thing. That can go deeper. So it's up to you to continue learning and getting inspired and figuring out what's wrong so that we can make it right.
So that's really interesting, your learnings and your observations from university. And then obviously you said since finding Bitcoin, you learned more than 4 years at university. But for your life specifically, when you did come across Bitcoin, would you mind going into a bit of detail around how your life has changed since adopting Bitcoin?
Yeah, yeah. So when I got Bitcoin, like really understood it, right? You feel like you really don't have enough. And it's true. That's always true, right? So I started becoming more of a producer than I was consumer. So I decided I was going to sell a lot of the clothes that I had because I just had too many clothes. I still have too many clothes. So I started thinking, oh, you know what? I got to sell some of these clothes. I need to start figuring out how I can create content, maybe get some advertising deals, maybe some brand deals, stuff like that. I have to find a way to generate second income or more income and just start creating and receiving dollars. So that way I can purchase Bitcoin faster and faster, right? In larger quantities before it's too late, right? Before I can no longer get Bitcoins with dollars, right? That's pretty far away. That's pretty far away. But the main thing is, how quickly can we race to 1 Bitcoin, 2 Bitcoin, 5 Bitcoins, 10 Bitcoins? Because the game is about getting as many Satoshis as possible, right? And any newbies, a Satoshi is a small unit of a Bitcoin, the same way that a cent is a small unit of a dollar, right? So you want to get as many Satoshis as possible, as quickly as possible. And before that, I was just focused on, oh, you know what? I'm going to buy some fake designer, you know what I mean? I'm gonna buy some things to flex on other people. It'll be realistic enough to where people can look at it and be like, oh, you know, he has money, you know, oh, that's cool, you know, all these different things. And it's just so pointless to do that because you're buying things to impress people that you don't even really like that much. And it's just ridiculous, you know. And I think a lot of people are in this loop where they do things like that. There's this other loop where people maybe try to do experiences because they're never going to be able to own assets. I was never really in that camp, but I noticed that a lot with young people is, you know what, I'll never be able to own a house or start a family. So I'm going to travel to Mexico and I'll go on a vacation instead, right? Because a vacation is more achievable than home ownership. And of course, some people who aren't that bright will hear that and they'll say, oh, are you saying you shouldn't go on vacation? I'm like, no, I didn't say that, low bro. What I'm saying is that a lot of people, what they're doing instead of trying to save for the future is they're discounting the future. The future doesn't exist. You know, the future is not achievable for them. The future, there is no hope in the future, right? You know, there's nothing to look forward to. So we're just going to try to live in the now only and just wing it, and who cares, right? You know, my life sucks anyway. My life's going to suck regardless. So that's how a lot of people move through life. That's how a lot of people move through their day to day. And that's not healthy either, right? Because you can be broke at 30, but all of those broke at 30 decisions started in your 20s, right? And that goes for your 40s as well, it goes for your 50s as well. So, in the off chance that you do end up living, which it's actually not the off chance, it's more likely that you end up living than you do dying. So, in the chance that you live to the future, you are not going to have any money. You're not going to have anything to show for it. You know, you're not going to have a good time, right? Because again, your job's not going to just start magically paying you more out of nowhere. And you're going to most likely want something more fulfilling than your day to day. You're going to maybe want to start a family. You're going to want to settle down with someone. You're going to want to try to take care of that person, or at least take care of yourself as you start to get older. And you might have a lot of life left in you. You know, you're only going to be 1 through 20 for 20 years. And then there's 21 through whoever knows how long. You might live to be 100 just because, you know, medicine's getting better, stem cell research, all these different things that we're doing. And your life might suck for longer than it is good. You know what I mean? You might have really fun 10 years between 15 and 25, and then you might have a really, really horrible 60 years waiting for you, right? Because you're not going to have any fixed income, right? Social Security is dead. They're not going to pay you. You know, there is no, that none of that's happening. So you throw that out the window. None of that's happening. There will be no retirement fund for you. Most jobs don't have pension funds anymore because, again, they don't want to pay you either. They don't want to do that. Instead, what they do is they give you a little K or something that you can invest in yourself, which most people don't know what investing is. They don't even know how to do it. So you're losing your money in your 401k or whatever your thing is, your retirement funded account that comes out of your paycheck every single week, as opposed to a pension. And you just end up in a situation where you're just trying to guess or gamble or scrape through and make it through life because the steps that you took earlier in life were all about the now, and you didn't think that you'd make it to the future. Now you're here in the future and there's no one here to help you. You know, and Bitcoin can't help you at that point either because you own zero, right? You bought none while it was purchasable. There's going to be a point in the future where you cannot purchase Bitcoin. You're only going to be able to work for it. Right. So the obvious example is you cannot like buy dollars. You know, wherever you live in the world, you can't just buy dollars. You can't just buy pesos. You can't just buy euros, really. You just have to work for them. And there's going to be a time where you have to just work for Bitcoin. You have to work for Satoshis. There is no buying them. You can maybe do like a currency exchange, but like where do you get the currency to begin with? You can't just buy the currency. You have to work for it. Someone will give it to you because you created value for them. And then you can then try to do whatever you want to do. You're not going to be able to buy Bitcoin in the future. By the time that, you know, again, I'm 25. By the time I'm 50, right? You know, if we double my age, by the time I'm 50, you know, Bitcoin will be over 30 years old. well over 30 years old, and you won't be able to buy it with dollars at that point. I really don't think so. I really do not think so. 25 years from now, another 25 years of Bitcoin growing, taking over, seeing how big it's already gotten in 16 years, right? From zero to 100,000, where it'll be in 25. I don't think you're going to be able to buy it. You got to work for it at that point. So don't be the person who has to work for Bitcoins at 50 years old because you bought zero when you were a youngster.
Yeah, and I want to keep on this topic of urgency for a minute if we can, because we're in this weird time of our lives right now, especially us being Gen Z, but you're still so early to Bitcoin, even though it doesn't feel like it for you and I when we really understood Bitcoin. It feels like we should have bought Bitcoin ages ago. But in the grand scheme of things, if someone starts buying Bitcoin today, they're still early compared to the rest of the world. But it's urgent to start buying Bitcoin. Do you want to go into a bit more around that urgency to really make it clear to our generation why now?
Yeah, my tagline for my YouTube channel is literally stack sats or die trying, right? Because you need to be doing that at all times. That should be your daily mission, right? And most people's mission anyway is to get money, get rich, get whatever. Okay, that's fine. But we need to be making sure we're getting real money. You know what I mean? Not fake money, not fiat. So you should be grinding, you should be getting after it, you should be chasing it, but you got to chase Satoshis. And the reason why is because, at one point, one Bitcoin was like $10, right? Now one Bitcoin is $100,000. There's going to be a point where one Satoshi, right? There's 100 million Satoshis in one Bitcoin. One Satoshi will be $1 and beyond. And that means that the Bitcoin price will be 100 million. And at that point, the truth is really, if Bitcoin is at $100 million, that means that your currency is completely dead, right? You won't be using the currency anymore. You will be buying everything with Satoshis, right? So an example of this is a gold bar. A gold bar is easily worth 100 million seashells or more, right? Because seashells really aren't that valuable. They're not real money. So they were at one point. They were at one point. Wampum was a very specific type of seashell that had been handcrafted and worked on by natives of a, older culture, older tribe back in the day. They would use wampum as currency. And wampum today is, again, it's just trash. It's just seashells that have been cut up to look a certain way. They might be okay as a bracelet or like a necklace, but they're not real money. They're just trash. So even with 100 million wampum, you probably still wouldn't be able to get a gold bar, right? Because a gold bar is just such hard money. It's such a rare asset that there's so much proof of work that goes into a gold bar. You understand, by looking at a bar of gold, someone somewhere, without them telling you, you know this inherently, someone had to go find where the gold was. Then they had to make the equipment to go mine the gold, and they needed the manpower to mine the gold and bring it up out of the ground. Then they had to refine the gold and separate it from all of the silt and dirt. Then they had to clean it off. Then they had to melt it down. Then they had to clean it off again. Then they had to polish it and refine it and try to take out any impurities. And there was all this work that went into it. And then finally, you're left with this gold bar. And all the proof of work that I just said is known to you instantly without you having to ask or verify because it's just obvious. The proof is literally in its existence. Bitcoin is the exact same way. Every time that a Bitcoin block is mined, when you talk about the blockchain, all the work that was used to produce that Bitcoin is inherent. You don't have to ask anyone. You can go check for yourself, right? Bitcoin is an open source protocol and the blockchain is very, you can read it very easily. You can go check it very easily. But every time a block is mined, every time Bitcoins are released to the world, all the work is right there. The work is up front. The proof is literally in the existence of the Bitcoin. You can tell that a lot of computational power and energy was given to the network in order for that Bitcoin to be created. And there's going to be points in the future where basically all the energy in the world is being poured into the Bitcoin network, defending the Bitcoin network. So all of that energy is represented as Bitcoins, and that value is represented as Bitcoins. So when you hold, let's just call it one Bitcoin, right? There's going to be a point, 10 years from now, 10 years from now, every single block mined is not even going to have one full Bitcoin inside of it, right? 10 to 12 years from now, it won't even be a full Bitcoin inside of a mined block every 10 minutes. So if you have more than one Bitcoin, that means you have the equivalent of the entire world's energy working towards you in a 10-minute time span. You know what I mean? If you own right now a current block, the block reward is 3.125 Bitcoins, right? I might be getting a little deep, but stick with me. Every 10 minutes, 3.125 Bitcoin are released into the world, right? That amount of Bitcoin is emitted into the market, 3.125. So if you have 3.125 Bitcoin right now, that means that you have the same amount as the block reward. And it takes all the computational energy in the whole world for 10 minutes straight to mine a block. So if you own that much value, that is essentially 10 minutes worth of all of the energy in the world being concentrated into this one point, into this one moment in time. That is a lot of value. What is the value of all the world's electricity and energy and computational power and hash rate put into, I guess, a physical form, right? That's what Bitcoin really is. Bitcoin is energy based money. So you get to have all of that energy based currency, all that value up front, and it's only going to become more valuable over time because the strength of the network is going to get stronger over time. The amount of people who are in the network becomes stronger as more people join it, right? The amount of hash rate is going to keep going up, meaning that the amount of energy dedicated to the network is going up, which means that the amount of value dedicated to the network is going up. So there's all these different factors that play into this. But at the end of the day, what you need to realize is that Bitcoin is still in its infancy, right? The internet, when it was 16 years old, was still in its infancy. So imagine the next 16 years, right? If Bitcoin's going to 100,000, then it's going to a million, and it's going to 10 million, it's going to 100 million, not just because, but because of its properties, because you can't make anymore, but they can still make more dollars. Right? They're going to keep making dollars. If they stop making dollars, then Bitcoin's price would still actually be increasing because the properties of Bitcoin as money is just superior to the current fiat system. But even if they did stop making the dollars, right? How long can they do that? Before now you're in this situation where you have unbelievable Great Depressions and unbelievable famines and unbelievable societal breakdowns because as soon as the money printer turns off, the society begins to collapse because now you have to actually pay off the deficit. Now you actually have to face the consequences of continually printing money, right? That's what the situation that we find ourselves in. That's why we cannot get rid of our deficits by normal means because they become too big, too much value has been created out of thin air, and now too many people rely on the fake value in order to make it through day to day, right? There's too many jobs, there's too much government agencies that rely on the money printer every single day to stop it. So you just have to keep going. And then there's more people born every day. There's more issues that we have to deal with every day. There's more natural disasters that we have to somehow find money to take care of every day. So then you turn the money printer on more. There's too many wars to fund for us to turn the money printer off. So you got to turn it up harder. There's too many people who are trying to get on Social Security. So you got to turn the money printer on harder. There's too many people who are reaching retirement age. We got to take care of them. You got to turn the money printer on harder. So there's all these factors that are leading to governments being forced to print their way out, to cut interest rates, right? And to figure out what they're going to do to keep the charade going. So this game of musical chairs is coming to an end. And when it does, you do not want to be the only one left standing, right? Bitcoin is the chair that you can sit on not only to win the game, but to exit the game completely because it's a completely different system. right? So that's pretty much why any young person today needs to be focused on buying Bitcoin, because Bitcoin's the future, and that's where the world's heading. If you pay enough attention, we already see these things happening, right? We're watching the digital transformation of money and of capital and of value. It's happening right in front of us. A lot of the older people, a lot of richer people are figuring this out slowly because they realize the downfall of fiat, the downfall of the dollar, the downfall of the West and the West's ability to kind of have a monopoly on money. That's going away, and Bitcoin is becoming the new global standard. And if you're too slow to realize this, you're going to be in a lot of pain.
And you've just spent some time with Lawrence Lepard, the author of The Big Print, who I recommend pretty much every video as a starting point for our generation to really get to understand the problem, because he lays it out in really easily digestible ways. One thing with our generation that they're sold the dream of is to buy their house, to get on the property ladder. And with the timing, with where we're all at, with all of these different avenues that are going to need money printing for the world to continue, like Lawrence talks about, and like you've just alluded to there, for those in our generation that are saving for a deposit or even buy a house, but let's just start with saving for a deposit in their savings accounts, with this big print going on, where does that leave them? What happens to that money in the savings account? And for those that maybe don't even get to the house before this big print really takes off, and for those listening, it's already taking off, where does that leave our generation that haven't got any Bitcoin, haven't got any assets?
Yeah, it's that same thing of hopelessness, right? So here's what's going to happen. You already have a job, maybe it's somewhat mediocre, and maybe you're lucky enough to have a partner who's willing to also combine their income with yours so that you can both work twice as quickly towards some of the goals that you want to reach. So one of the goals might be owning a house, and of course, you want to do a decently sized deposit. I think you want to do more than 30% down, because if you don't, there's some sort of fee or some sort of tax that you pay because the company or the bank that owns the house sees you as a risk. You're like a flight risk. You're like a liability. If you only put down 5% or only put down 10% or something like that, if you put down the minimum, you pay an additional tax on top of what you're already paying, which is insane, but that's just how it is. So when you're saving up to try to make that down payment, if you are not keeping up with the rate of inflation, what's going to happen is your wage is going to stay stagnant. So you're not going to start making any more money, but the value of the house, or the price of the house, rather, not the value, the price of the house is going to continue to go up, which means that the amount of money you're going to need for the deposit is going to continue to go up and scale up. So maybe when you start in 2025, you say, okay, by 2030, I need to be able to have, let's just say you're going to do 30%. I need to have $100,000 in order to do a 33% down payment on my $300,000 house, right? So it's 2025. We're going to do it in 2030. And I'm going to have 5 years to save up my 100,000, and I'm going to go ahead and put down the money, and then we're going to get that house, and it's going to be great. Then fast forward to 2030, we've gone through insane amounts of money printing, the same way we have been since the start of, uh, you know, this century, right? Since the start of the century and before, but it's really ramped up as we've gone through it. So the price of the house is now 600,000. All right. And in order for you to do your 30%, you're going to have to do $200,000 minimum. So 5 years later, you get to 2030, you have your 100,000, and now you can't even do what you planned on. That's what I mean by not being able to plan for the future, because your future is constantly being stolen from you. The value of your work is constantly being stolen from you. And that's what happens when you're not on a Bitcoin standard. Now, on a Bitcoin standard, while they're printing all that money, while all this AI innovation is going on, while all this efficiency is going on, Bitcoin's absorbing all that value, right? Because one, you can't make any more of it. And two, again, it's tied to the amount of computational energy that's being put into the system. So while Bitcoin's being continually adopted, and while the dollar is being continually debased, Bitcoin is the hardest asset in the world, so it's going to grow faster than your house, right? The inflated value of your house is going to be slower than the growth of Bitcoin. Bitcoin's going to outgrow everything. It's already been outgrowing everything. It's going to continue to outgrow everything because it's one, it's novel, right? It's new. And two, it's the most rare thing in the universe, right? It's the only scarce thing in the entire universe. So because it is scarce and you literally cannot make any more, its value is going to retain compared to the dollar, right? When you see the house go from 300,000 to 600,000, it's not that the area just got 2 times better. In fact, the area probably got 2 times worse. Right. The area probably got 2 times worse. There's probably more crime over the 5 year period where the house doubled in price. It was the value of the dollar. Before you needed 300,000 pieces of paper to buy your dumb little house. Now you need 600,000 pieces of paper to buy that same dumb house. The house is literally older. It's worse now, right? People were probably living in it, so it's worse. Even if people weren't living in it, it's still worse. If you have an empty house that just sits there for 5 years, the house is worse than it was when it was new 5 years ago, right? So the house is worse, regardless of whether there's people in it or not. It's worse every single time, no matter what, right? Because things get worse as you use them. As they go through time, they get worse. And then on top of that, like I said, the area is probably worse. You know what I mean? Even though the price has gone up. So as you continue to debase money, it becomes harder to get the things you want. Gen Zers need to focus on getting Bitcoin now and acquiring Bitcoin now because that's the asset that'll allow them to own all of the analog assets that they want. Bitcoin is the digital asset that allows Gen Z the window of opportunity to own all of the analog assets that the previous generation had easier access to, right? So the ability to buy a house is easier on a Bitcoin standard. The ability to buy a new car is easier on a Bitcoin standard. The ability to start a family is easier on a Bitcoin standard because you have real money. You have hard money. You have money that's not losing value over time. It's gaining value over time.
Yeah, that's really, really well laid out in basic terms. So thank you very much for that. And to continue on with explaining this to Gen Z specifically, as that is your username, what have you found most successful for Gen Z to really start either realizing there's a problem? Because I think so many of our generation are still walking around hopeless, but not even aware that there's a problem going on. And B, then also understanding Bitcoin, or at least giving it the time of day to have a look.
Yeah, I would say that the biggest thing that's been most effective for me personally is just talking to people in person and generating curiosity out of them through your actions and through your lifestyle. So I think it's a lot easier to orange pill people when they already know you because they already trust you a certain amount. They already understand and know who you are to a certain degree. You're not just an internet stranger. You are Finn, right? They know Finn. So if you are the Bitcoin guy, if you are fully embracing being a Bitcoiner, if you're rocking a Bitcoin hat right around when you walk around town, or you're rocking a Bitcoin shirt, or if you are a yoga instructor and you have the Bitcoin accepted here sign on your front door, or if you are a food truck and you accept Bitcoin, or if you are a uh, any sort of business owner, any sort of individual, right? Me at my day job, I do logistics. I'm a freight sales guy, right? I coordinate trucks and shipments and international shipments and containers and stuff like that. I have the ability to go after the leads that I want to go after. I can talk to the companies I want to talk to and tell them, hey, I do this. Let's work together, right? I can help you with your operations. And I decided to talk to Bitcoin mining companies, publicly traded American Bitcoin mining companies, right? And some of them are my biggest customers, right? So now I'm working with Bitcoin companies at my sales job, which is a freight job. It's not related to Bitcoin at all, but I turned it into a Bitcoin related job by focusing on these types of customers, these types of people, this type of commodity, right? And when that happens, Sometimes you get a really big shipment or a really valuable shipment or a really popular or important shipment. And now during the team meeting, they're talking about, oh, Gen Z just put up this much money by moving Bitcoin mining equipment for this company. And people hear that and they're like, wait, I thought Bitcoin was digital. How are you moving freight for Bitcoin? What does that mean? What do you even move? And then you get to show them, well, this is what a Bitcoin mining rig looks like. This is what a Bitcoin mining farm looks like. This is Hut 8. Hut 8 is an American Bitcoin mining company. This is what their facilities look like. This is what I helped to build. This is what I helped to move. This is why they need this many transformers, because they're capturing stranded energy, right? They're building a hydro dam. They're building a wind farm. They're building a solar farm. Why are they doing that? Because they need stranded energy. They need cheap energy so that way they can mine Bitcoin. Well, why are they doing that? Because mining Bitcoin can be very profitable if you can do it for cheap. If you have very cheap kilowatt hours, you can mine Bitcoin almost for free and you can get paid to secure the network, right? Well, why are they doing that? And it turns into this whole thing to where you try to help them understand why Bitcoin mining exists, why it uses energy, how it uses energy, how it monetizes clean energy, all these different things. So it's just this rabbit hole that you can send people down, but it starts with being the Bitcoin guy, right? You have to embrace it, you have to embody it, you have to live it, right? I don't have PayPal or Venmo or anything on my phone anymore because I'm not paying people in dollars, right? If you go out to eat with me and you want to cover the check, I'm paying you back in Bitcoins only. If you don't want to do that, then we're splitting the check. You know what I mean? That's how I like to move. That's how I live my life. It's literally embodying the being a Bitcoiner, right? Integrating Bitcoin into everything that you can as much as you can, right? If I know that there's a burger joint that accepts Bitcoin, I'm going over there. Steak and Shake, there's a Steak and Shake near me. A Steak and Shake is very pro Bitcoin. All right, I'm going to Steak and Shake today. Just stuff like that. So that's what I've noticed. That's the best way to get people to be interested about Bitcoin and curious and willing to learn is you have to be the Bitcoin person because they already kind of trust you, but it hits different when you're really embracing it to its fullest potential and integrating it into your daily life because you really do this.
Yeah, that's a great point. And if I'm honest, once you adopt Bitcoin and you fully understand it, you fully embody it because there is no going back once you fully understand Bitcoin. I'm mindful of the time. I've got to go in 4 minutes. But before I pass the mic over to you for any last words that you might want to add in, I'd like to finish off with, for anyone that's listening that might be curious, if you only had one book or one video or one thing a Gen Z watching this right now could do to further their understanding or to get into Bitcoin, what would that be?
This is just me personally, right? Most people might not like this strategy. And if I'm being honest, most people might not be smart enough to do this strategy. Not like I'm some genius, but most people kind of just not the brightest. I decided when I was first trying to learn and understand Bitcoin, I took like maybe 2 months straight of just trying to figure out how Bitcoin could not work. Right. So the problem with that strategy is that if you're not really open minded and if you're not in the right places to figure out how Bitcoin works, you could try to trick yourself or convince yourself to become an altcoiner, right? And you start buying XRP like a real idiot, or you start buying, Dogecoin like that's gonna save your life or something like that. So again, if you're a stupid person, I would not recommend that. If you're kind of dumb, I would just recommend watch Yoni Appleberg's YouTube channel. Watch Yoni Appleberg's YouTube channel. He has a lot of great pro Bitcoin content. But me personally, I first thought Bitcoin was so good, it was too good to be true. I need to figure out how Bitcoin does not work. I need to figure out how Bitcoin fails. And then after 2 months of running into dead end after dead end after dead end after dead end, I decided, okay, now we can go 100% all in on Bitcoin. I can literally safely put my life savings in Bitcoin. And then what I realized is having your life savings outside of Bitcoin is actually more risky than having all of your life savings inside of Bitcoin. It's risky to have none. You know what I mean? It's risky to have all your money in the fiat system inside of a Chase Bank or a JP Morgan bank. That's way more risky. And if that sounds crazy to you, there's more research to be done.
Yeah, and before I let you go, what I will do is put all of your links in the description below. But if you'd also like to tell anyone watching where they can find you on socials.
Yeah. You guys can find me on YouTube at Gen Z BTC. I'm gonna try uploading more and being more consistent. It's just kind of hard again with my freight and sales job. It's 24/7. People ask me for stuff all the time. And it's 1 a.m. where I'm at now, 2 a.m. and I got to get ready to go to work in 2 hours. So, when you're a Bitcoiner, you try to make these sacrifices and you make it happen, but it's just kind of hard. So, Gen Z BTC on YouTube and Gen Z BTC on X. And if you're watching this, if you are a logistics person or a freight manager, or you have shipments, or you do international, or you have trucks that go over the road, let me know. You can reach out to me again through X or through my YouTube channel. My email's on there. And I'd love to work with more Bitcoiners. I've made 2 or 3 customers just from my YouTube channel. So I'm trying to make some more. So if you're listening to this and it makes sense to talk to me about that, reach out. I help really big companies move really big stuff. So I could definitely help you, whatever you got.
Awesome, man. How cool. Yeah, I'll drop them in the description below. And is there anything that you'd like to leave a message to Gen Z specifically before we close the episode out?
Honestly, I really do think I said everything I need to say. All I can say now is stack sats or die trying.
What a way to finish. Thanks. Really appreciate you jumping on. I know it's early hours of the morning for you, and maybe we'll jump on another one soon.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Sounds good to me. Thank you so much for having me. And I'll see you guys hopefully on the next one. You have a good one.